Well, I knew this was a really stupid quest to take up. And I think originally I said no, because one cannot talk about the next 100 years. Things are going so fast. And anyway, if I would have certainly absolutely refused completely if I would have realized that I would be following a President Cardoso, who then asked in a short number of questions, basically all of the questions there are already. So it is hard to follow when they've all been asked. But so I'm going to talk for a few minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions, which is a much more interesting part of it for me. So what I'll do is just use these few minutes as a framework to in which to slot in discussion and maybe to trigger things. So as you think, as I talk, as I say things, if they remind you of things that we could talk about, make a mental note so that we can then do them during the Q&A. It is intimidating for lots of reasons to be here against this incredibly erudite audience in this place, which is doing such amazing things, and it's great. It's great to be, for me, the first time in Lisbon. It's a wonderful city to discover, a wonderful country to be in, wonderful fish to eat, and a great and a fantastic location to be in when the window is open. So let me put things in perspective, I suppose. Yes, I'm sorry we're not supposed to talk about the past, but that's the only way we talk about the future. So the only thing we can do is to draw analogies to a certain extent. So let me tell you about the idea of platforms, which happens. The concept of platforms is what people tend to use when they look at the internet technology coming. And you can think of technology. A technology platform is something which is very general purpose. So it doesn't just provide one function. It raises the level of development of humankind and allows people to innovate on another level. So for example, just around the corner is the power station, which was built here when Lisbon first got electric power. And now I gather you can go and look around it as a museum. It's sort of really compared to some of the things we celebrate in London, like Battersea Power Station, which is really ugly. This one is really quite pretty, so I can recommend it. So the electricity was a platform. The folks who designed it, when Edison, he figured out that you could use it for various things. You knew you could make magnetic fields with it. You could make light bulbs if you got the right materials. But obviously, when people started stringing up electric wires around and designing and producing the network and the infrastructure for the electricity platform, they had no idea about electronics. They had no idea about miniaturization. They had and about logic and and about computer systems and so on. But the electric infrastructure, of course, was really important. Now, there's other innovations are not so much, I suppose, thinkable as platforms. Like we had the nuclear, very double-edged innovation, nuclear power and nuclear weapons. We had, built on the electric one, we had computers. I was, I think, really lucky to be of this generation. My parents met and were both involved in building the first computers in the UK. The Manchester University Mark I computer was commercialized by Ferranti Limited, and they worked for Ferranti in a little hut tin hut they'd added to the end of the main factory building in Manchester to build this new computer thing. And they were all excited about the endless possibility. Alan Turing, of course, from that era, pointing out that there's a sense of absoluteness about the idea of a computer, because if you have a computer and I have a computer, if those computers are worth being called computers, if they're Turing machines, then one can imitate the other. And therefore, if your machine can always imitate my machine, then anything I do on my computer, however smart I am at programming it, you can always program your machine to emulate my machine and therefore do everything mine could do. So in that age, in the 50s, there was a time when people were using electricity to make computers, and they realized that computers were special because you could do what you could do with them was, to a certain extent, limited only by your imagination. Those were wonderful times. I won't dwell on them at great length, but they, for me, I suppose, they were very exciting. I also, during that point, transistors were being invented. Transistors became affordable by a teenager just about when I was a teenager, and so I could go down to the right stores in London and buy bags of them and build logic boards. And I could build the pieces, the sorts of registers and adders and things and memory flip-flops that you use in computers. And at the time when I was a teenager, then I knew how to build a computer, but knew that it would have been huge. Not as big as the one that Mom and Dad were programming initially, but still huge. But then integrated circuits came out. And so, in fact, I was benefiting from that thing which we now talk about as Moore's law, with the fact that the size of the computing element has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And as a result, to a certain extent, cheaper and cheaper. So I could buy integrated circuits, and at the point when I was leaving for university, I could get a television set and a microprocessor chip and a bunch of logic and a soldering iron and make a computer. So that was really, really neat. So I feel that my generation and all my friends who were also making computers at home understood how computers worked. My parents understood about how they worked, but they never had the ability at that time to really have something which was powerful enough to do all the things they expected to do. They expected to use the first computer to convert English into Russian and back again. Okay, lots of funny jokes around the dinner table about times when it failed. In a way, we're still waiting for that to be. So that's always just around the corner. So it's very hard to predict what you will be able to do and won't be able to do. But my generation have had this, we've had the luxury of, if you like, coasting this Moore's law. So what's happened is that the computers have got faster, then networks were developed, and the networks, and in 1969, Vint Cerf and his colleagues defined a good way of connecting all these different networks together so that the computers would be programmed to pass the packets around like a little bit like postcards being passed around the country through different post offices. And so they designed a system which connected the networks together, and they called it the internet. And so, and that internet, which ran when I first used it, I probably used it at 300 bits a second. The same internet technology that I used sort of 20 years after its inception to build the World Wide Web in 1989, that same internet technology went faster and faster, and the computers using it went faster and faster. So to a certain extent, I've been of the generation where we could write a really bad program which didn't really work, and then just find it was unsatisfactory because it wasn't efficient enough, and then just leave it for 5 years and come back to it. Hey, it's a really good program because the computers have got so much faster. So, and of course, one of the things which the computer scientists in the lab are looking forward to, some of them, is if Moore's law and this progression actually starts to come to an end in the future soon, then we will have to learn to program properly again. There will be no more laziness because these computers will not anymore get faster and faster and faster. We will have to write more and more efficient code. So electricity was a platform, the internet was a platform. Let me stress that it's really, what's interesting about that is that when Vint Cerf and company designed it, they did not design it without any attitude. It didn't, they didn't have any expectations about what it should be used for. Similarly with the web, I could build on the internet platform, I could build the web as another platform, but there's no attitude to it. You don't have to come and ask me to make a website. It's not centralized. Socially, it's not centralized. Technically, you can build whatever websites you like, and that's why it's been such an explosion. Now, interestingly, we have the Open Web platform, which again is another platform on top of that. One of the interesting things with the Open Web platform, the Open Web platform is when you have when a web page has code in it, when it's not just a declarative static web page. It's got JavaScript in it as well. That makes every web page like a computer. And the excitement that my parents felt when they looked at a computer and thought, wow, that we can program with that, with whatever we can imagine. That now applies to every web page. So a web developer can program the code in each web page. In fact, you can use real-time communication, RTC, to communicate between all the web pages. So you can build a completely distributed platform and just deploy it on the web instantly. So the whole point about all of this is that the platform is becoming faster and faster and faster. And if looking into the future, we think that we can imagine at all the future looking at anything like it is now, that's crazy. We have to assume it's going to go on changing faster and faster and faster. And so, except for a few things, yes, Moore's law may come gently, more or less to a halt, it may not. Some things, of course, don't change. If we are using our human brains as part, and even if we're connecting them with brilliant computer programs, the power of one human brain, even though we apply it and we're very plastic and we adapt our brains to the new connected environment, the power of a human brain isn't really changing, not like the power of a computer is changing. The speed of light hasn't changed much either. So, for example, it's still valuable coming together here when I can see your reaction pretty much immediately. If you were the other side of the planet, there would still be a certain, a number of hundreds of milliseconds of delay, even if we had a brilliant screen and great cameras and 3D things. So the speed of light limits us when it comes to doing things at a distance throughout the world, and of course, it really limits us when it comes to space travel. So there are things that you think, well, surely science will get better and better and better, but no, actually, we're getting to other galaxies which are many, many light years away, that ain't going to get, that's one of the things that's not going to change. So when you look at the things that we need to do with these platforms, obviously at the moment, in this building, represented some of the great challenges, some of the great possibilities with neuroscience, curing cancer, curing Alzheimer's, understanding how disease is obviously a massive challenge. There are wonderful things which we will be able to do if we collaborate well, if we manage to in a way, use this technology to be able to make the collection of scientists that gather together to solve these problems greater than one of them. I think a really interesting question about the future, even though it's not my field, is when we get off the planet. When in this 100 years are we going to get off the planet? I think it's a priority. It's really hard to just, remember Arthur C. Clarke was a character who was pretty darn good at looking at the future. As people, he really takes the biscuit when it comes to, he figured out communication satellites, he figured out space stations, he figured out people being in space. He even figured out computers getting too smart for their inventors. And he wrote a book about all that, and the title of the book was 2001. Okay, you remember that? All that space travel we did in 2001? Not really. It was really, he could imagine how everything worked, but he had no idea how difficult it would be for this darn clump of people on the planet to get their act together and actually do it. So that is one of the really interesting questions of the future. It's not just about what do we have to do, but will we be able to get our act together and do it? So if you look at, and in fact, so why of all the challenges, why did I pick getting off the planet? Well, in a way, if you listen to Bob May's talk, he'll give you a good list of talks about reasons about why it's good to get off the planet. He catalogues, the reasons why we might have to, because we might mess this one up. Obviously, climate change is the big one. It's pretty warm here, but you know what? It was 18 degrees in Boston. It was 18 degrees in London in November too. So, climate change is real. Yeah, we've actually gone up one of our 2 degrees that we're allowed. So climate change is big. serious. We have not demonstrated our ability to collaboratively solve it. Meanwhile, we could have accidents of the nuclear kind. We could have accidents of the chemical kind, of the biological kind. We could have biological viruses that we accidentally make. We could have a genetic gene driver that we accidentally release. Gene drivers are tricky things. These are genes which work like cuckoos. Like the cuckoo is a bird, certainly in England, which when it lays its nests in other birds' nests, and the little baby cuckoo is programmed to get under the other eggs and push them out of the nest. So that the cuckoos end up getting a sort of cheating evolution a little bit. Well, they're just using evolution, and a gene driver is something that kind of cheats in the same way as when the genes are divided up, it kind of cheats and gets selected anyway, whatever is on, instead of only getting selected half the time. So it's a kind of frightening thing which allows you to take a genetic trait that you want to which you think will be a really good idea and release it so that it goes in a few generations exponentially through the entire, eventually through your entire population, so you don't have any the population which don't have that gene. So, for example, you could imagine a genetic accident which sort of wipes out the population of the Earth, or does something, or wipes out something else which we ended up realizing, whoops, we depended on after all. And just as we can imagine accidents in the nuclear, chemical, biological, genetic kinds, for each of these things, we can imagine attacks. And recently, I think we're becoming much more focused on the attack version of these scenarios. So lots of reasons why we could mess up here unintentionally or intentionally. And so therefore we should so getting off the planet is an important one in the 100 years. Then that's one of the big questions to ask. So what's the big challenge? Yeah, it's sort of going back to getting our act together. It's funny when it's kind of a little bit ironic. So we have the internet, and the interesting thing about the internet is that when it was designed, it didn't have countries. When you connect together, you could connect together computers to form the internet without worrying about what country they're in. And on the web, you can, when you read a website, you're not actually necessarily aware unless you check of which websites, well, which country it's in. So the whole structure has been designed to be sort of nation-free, and that's wonderful. Except for the fact that I don't notice that we have used this nation-free to bring. We haven't actually, meanwhile, socially or politically, brought about the John Lennon's imaginings of a wonderful utopian collaboration. So we have got the ability to read the website of anybody in any culture, but most of the time, you speak Portuguese most of the time, a lot of you, and you'll quite reasonably spend your time reading Brazilian and Portuguese websites. It's reasonable to support the culture. I think cultures are very important, and languages and literatures, and so are important. But meanwhile, we seem to be running up again and again against this inability of people to actually sympathize with the people of another culture. It seems to be so easy for a wayward religion to use. Maybe do we have, neurologically, do we have a basic xenophobia which has been programmed into us by evolution, which we just won't be able to get rid of? Will that always trip us up? Will the best attempts to produce international collaborations and to produce organizations bridging different cultures, will it always be tripped up by our individuals' propensity, if triggered, to feel revengeful and to switch to becoming nasty? I think that so one of the things I suggest to you is that if, in terms of direction for the future, as if we're going to use this web, if you're going to build websites, if you're building social networks, try building them so that instead of just introducing people who know each other to themselves, instead of making the social network more globular, try to introduce them what I call a stretch friend, a sort of a stretch friend is a friend. It's like a normal friend, except it stretches you. It introduces somebody which is from a different culture, or speaks a different language, or maybe of a different gender, or has a different sexual orientation. So stretch friends you don't see in social networks. That was one idea. Suppose if we introduce them to social networks, would we start to end up with bit by bit more and more understanding? Can we build technical systems at the same time as we build social systems which will allow us to come to an understanding, which will allow us to work together, which will allow us to trust across the planet? Somehow, I suppose all the organizations I've always been involved with, they're based on a respect for people, no matter what color, race, culture, language, disability, gender, or sexual preference. And I suppose that's the way I like to work, because I want my kids and their children to grow up in a world which has got that property, where they can rely on not having to be discriminated on any of those things. The list often includes religion as well. And I put culture in, although I'm not so sure sometimes about the resurgence of religion. So I find myself siding more and more with Richard Dawkins about worrying that there are elements of religion, while there are elements of religion which are great and wonderful, in fact, however, that religion should be allowed to the extent that it doesn't break this rule, this rule of respect for everybody, is something which is more primal, which is something which we should take and hold our religions accountable to it, and make them, if you like, second to it. So those are just some directions, ways in which ways in which we should continue, but we don't have any options. We do have to move off this planet. We do have to go on into the future. So sail on. We must. Thank you.